Good afternoon, everybody. Welcome back to Students of the Word. This is session number 51, and today we're going to return after having taken a few weeks to look at the big picture. Basically, we got into paragraph 9, and well, I won't say we got stuck, but we reached a sort of a crisis point where I felt like I really needed context, that we needed to stop and do some synthesis in order to make sure that we were understanding what on earth is going on in paragraph 9. So if we just jump ahead briefly to paragraph 9, of course, the critical thing was there right away in verse 6 and 7 of chapter 3 here. No one who abides in him sins. No one who sins has seen him or knows him. So that was the really tricky verse we got up to in our verse by verse track. And I want to emphasize that a common question is to be looking at the verb tenses here, right? I feel like that this has been a kind of exegetical solution that many have sought in Bible study, right? That is, to think about the verb, no one who abides in him sins. So some people have been like, well, maybe that means like to sin, like to continue sinning, like to be sinning all the time, right? And there are two reasons I don't really believe in that kind of, in trying to make, the word I kept using last time was, it's not just about making this paragraph palatable, it's making it endurable, right? Like, is it possible? Is it reconcilable with like our experience in any way? Because that's a legit question for this paragraph. I mean, this whole idea that nobody, who has a relationship with God, no one who is a child of God has the power to sin anymore. That's tough, right? That's really tough. And so again, as we talked about last time, a lot of people have a, well, that can't possibly be what he means reaction, which of course I think is true, of course, in some ways. But one of the ways in which it's tempting to get over that is to do, I guess, what I would call, from an interpretive standpoint, trying to get off on a technicality, and so it's a present tense verb, right? Anyone abiding in him does not sin, and anyone sinning, which is present participle, right? Yeah, present participle, has not seen him, nor has he known him. And these are aorist, right? So those are referring back to a particular, no, sorry, it's perfect. They're perfect, not aorist. Okay. So they're perfect. Has not seen him or has known him, referring to an action that's completed at the present time. So, yes, I don't think that the kind of distinction I've heard people wanting to draw here, that is like basically what could be translated like no one abiding in him sins like continually or repeatedly or something like that. I don't, it's just present tense. Like it doesn't, I don't think that the syntax will really bear that as being like, no, that's specifically what John means here. That doesn't seem to me to work. But moreover, it kind of, instead of taking the thing that John is clearly saying, because he is, as I say, the problem with this paragraph is not that it's unclear, it's that it's too clear, right? It's way too clear. So taking what John is saying, instead of taking John is saying and turning it into something which really kind of doesn't mean much or make much sense. I mean, if you translate it like does not sin continuously, well, who does? I mean, like even horrible people, like even people very deeply corrupt indeed don't sin continuously. I mean, presumably they can like sit down and eat breakfast without, anyway, whatever. You see what I mean? Like it's, he's, if you try to kind of make it out that if, as long as you're not sinning constantly, right? And again, and obviously when you push that to a logical extreme, it seems ridiculous, but that's the point, is that I think it's an attempt to kind of push it really hard in one way in order to make it endurable, right? or but even if you back off from the more rigid, like continuous, right, and instead think of it only in terms of um repeatedly or habitually or something like that, which again, I don't does not seem to me there's any real justification for in the syntax. um I still think, I would still say that that is uh it's it's trying to deal with what John is saying, not by like receiving it in the context of what he says, but instead trying to trying to deflect it a little bit, and point it in a different direction, right? Um, and that it really is, I feel like that impulse, again, though I totally understand the impulse, it seems to me ultimately to be sort of domesticating what John is saying a little bit, right? Um, what John is saying here is distressingly radical. That's the problem. Again, the problem is not that it's not clear. The problem is that it's clear. And it seems distressingly radical. And so we want to kind of de-radicalize it. And so to say, um, nobody who abides in him sins, full stop, is radical, right? But to say nobody who abides in him sins habitually, okay, yeah, that's that's less radical, right? That's kind of domesticated. In fact, so domesticated that it um no longer has much punch at all. And I think if you're reading this paragraph and it isn't punchy, you're not reading it correctly. John seems to me to be going rather out of his way to be a bit punchy here, um, in this paragraph. So if it's not, blowing you back in your chair at all, I think you're probably missing the point. Anyway, but this impulse, these problems, these reasons are why we were looking at this in context and trying to understand this, in view of the way he had talked about sin before and all the paragraphs leading up to it. Well, today we're going to now bring that context that we've been seeing and this new understanding that we had. At least I feel like it's been a very helpful understanding, in that and that basic understanding is we were looking at how in the flow of his overall discussion in this epistle so far, he talks about the passing of the current age and the coming of the coming of the life to come, of what we are and what we shall be, and how it's not yet revealed what we shall be, but God has been revealed, but he's not revealed yet, right? So like that so much of the epistle is leaning into that place, the acknowledgement of what has been revealed, in Jesus, through Jesus, but yet more revelation is to come, right? The final revelation has not yet occurred. Everything is not, we are not yet, God in his fullness has not been appeared, has not been revealed. We have not been brought into his presence, and by being brought into his presence, transformed, and to being like he is, right? And notice that's exactly what he's describing here, right? I mean, again, if we just that's just the paragraph before, right? Beloved, we are now children of God, and it has not appeared as yet what we will be. We know, and it's not yet, has not been revealed what he will be. We know that when he is revealed, we will be like him, because we will see him just as he is. We will be like him. How's that again? If we're going to be like him, how's he? Oh, yeah. He is light, and in him there is no darkness at all. And that's exactly how John describes us in this paragraph. No one who abides in him sins, right? In him there is no sin. No one who abides in him sins, he says back to back, right? We are his children. We will be like him. And he goes on to describe that. And he is bringing that future sort of aggressively into the present here, right? Wanting us to see this vision. So let's go back. Let's do the paragraph. Let's go verse by verse. That's what we're going to do today. Go verse by verse through paragraph 9. And we've talked about all these verses before. We've looked at the Greek before. We will, but I want to go through and do a close sort of synthesis of this paragraph now that we have this context and see how it works. Okay. Let's go back to the Greek. Everyone doing sin, all the doing sin ones also do lawlessness. Anomia. Remember, introducing, connecting, rooting that idea of sin in the idea of rebellion against God. And this, of course, sets up the whole God is light and in him there is no darkness at all, right? Showing how antithetical sin and God are, just like darkness and light, again, as he has already set up. And sin is lawlessness. Hamartia is rebellion. It's like this the beginning of this paragraph almost feels like a mathematical proof, right? Like we're stating givens. Given that sin is lawlessness, A, and B, you know that he was revealed so that he might take away sins, and there is no sin in him. So, given number 1, sin is rebellion, lawlessness, rebellion against God. Given number 2, there is no sin in him, obviously. Given number 3, he was revealed, the revelation that has happened, the revelation of Jesus that has occurred. The purpose of it was so that he might take away sins, right? So not only is sin naturally not in him, but his whole purpose was to take it away. So, given those 3 givens, pas, ho, and automenon, all the abiding in him ones do not sin. All the sinning ones have not seen him nor come to know him. And of course, we can immediately see the parallels way back to verse 1 of the epistle, right? Have not seen him or come to know him, right? We should totally be remembering that which was aparkes from the beginning, what we have heard, what we have seen with our eyes, what we have looked at and handled with our hands concerning the word of life, right? This, in other words, we not only saw him, but we have come to know him. This egnoken verb, this gnosko verb, right, which has come up a whole bunch of times, that seems to be, he doesn't use that verb here in the beginning, right? But that in that first verse, I mean, doesn't use that verb. But it, especially when we see how that verb gets used throughout the rest of the epistle, it seems like he's kind of pointing to that, right? He's not here describing just something that we've been informed about, right? We don't just oidate, right? We don't just receive as fact, receive information about him. We came to know him. And that's, like this sort of multi-sensory interaction, right? We didn't just hear, we saw with our eyes. We didn't just see with our eyes, we looked at, we gazed upon it, right? We studied it. We touched with our hands. We experienced it, right? We encountered it in this way. Concerning the word of life. We've come to know God, right? And Devorah, you're very right to remember in paragraph 3, by this we know that we have come to know him, right? How do you know that you know him? If we keep his commandments. And that's this know verb, right? This is, as I recall, this is the first time that this verb is used in this epistle, when he talks about how do we know that we have come to know him. And again, the proof right? The proof of our knowledge, the demonstration of our knowledge, of our having come to know him, of our not just an encounter with him, right? All of those different, we've heard him, we've seen him, we've gazed upon him, studied him, we've handled him, touched him with our hands. Um, what's the fruit of that? How do you know that you know? By actions, right? By looking at what you do. Um, if you keep his word, that's how you know that you've come to know him, which of course he goes on to connect right away with the love of God being perfected in you, right? Okay, but anyway, all right. So um back to 9. Um no one who abides in him sins. None of the all of the abiding in him ones don't sin. Uh all of the sinning ones, none of the sinning ones, right? Um pause, right. All the sinning ones have not seen him nor known him. And this is where I come back to the phrase, the Greek phrase, the pasho phrase, each of the or all of the, um, with the with the present participle, right? So no, sorry, this one, the present participle. Um, all of these phrases, the things that are translated, everyone who or no one who in English, and again, I'm not contesting those are like very sensible translations, because they're totally very sensible translations. That's how we would say it in English, right? But I think it's interesting to see that that's not, in fact, how it's said in Greek. And here's why I think that's important. Um, you're right. It is singular. So I agree. Randall is pointing out that since it's singular, the paso phrase is singular. Pas is singular here, not plural. And I keep saying all of the abiding in him ones, which is plural, right? So I agree. Randall is right. What I should be saying instead of all of the is each of the abiding in him ones, because he's using the singular. Totally right about that. Anyway, I know I think I've pointed to this before, but it seems to me particularly relevant now in this paragraph. Um, in English, when we say everyone who or no one who, um, and again, that's how this phrase keeps coming. No one who abides in him, no one who sins, everyone who practices, no one who is born. Um, the way that this is structured in English is with the pronoun, essentially, everyone or no one. And then that pronoun is being modified by a clause. Everyone, everyone who practices sin, right? So who practices sin modifies everyone. It's an adjective clause, right? It's like this is about the everyone. And then we're clarifying which everyone we're talking about. Everyone who practices sin. No one who abides in him. What you lose by translating it that way is the present participle. The present participle, committing, doing sin. Um, and then anyone, right? So abiding, right? Doing sin, abiding, sinning. Each of the sinning ones has not seen him, nor has he known him, right? So whereas the emphasis is on like the pronoun everyone, no one, and we just have to kind of clarify what we mean by everyone or no one, right? In In the Greek, the emphasis is on, and again, and when we do it with a present tense clause. Who practices sin? Who abides in him? Who sins? Who is born of God? Right? All of those are just present tense clauses in order to clarify who's the no one or the everyone that we're talking about. Right? But in Greek, the phrase he keeps using is a participial phrase. It's about present action. Like the emphasis is on ongoing action. Each of the sinning ones. Who practices lawlessness? Who's guilty of rebellion against God? Each of the sinning ones. And you notice where the emphasis, there's no question, right? Pashal is like each of the that's just a setup, right? And it's the same. It's like a stock phrase, right? All the way through. Each of it's all the weight is all on the present participle there. Each of the doing sin ones also does lawlessness. Each of the abiding in him ones does not sin. Each of the born of him ones does not do sin. Right? Do you see the difference? Do you feel the difference that I'm pointing to? John's emphasis is, I would say, just by this structure. And I know this is not like a weird structure he's using. I mean, we've seen him do this a lot, right? He loves this structure, this piece of syntax here, right? He does this kind of thing a great deal. And Randall, I know that you and others have said that this is a pretty common way of structuring things in Greek, which is good. Again, my point is not that John is doing something like weird and funky in doing this. I'm just saying it seems to me very clearly the emphasis of what somebody thinking in Greek is laying the stress on, and it's not. And I think it's not the same. Notice even another change, the difference in English between everyone and no one. Right? It kind of is there's a difference in emphasis between everyone who abides in him does not sin and no one who abides in him sins. Right? Like it's technically the same, but the emphasis is different. It's not just a negative pronoun, like an absent, right? No one pronoun, right? The verb itself is negative. It's talking about doing something again, and the thing that is being done is not sinning, right? It's a negative action, right? And from the beginning, like literally from the very first phrase of this paragraph, the emphasis has been on poion, on doing. Each of the doing sin ones also does lawlessness. Right? So he not only starts us off with some givens about what the nature of sin is, right, and why it's important. Hamartia estin estin he anomia, like hamartia estin he anomia. The sin is the lawlessness. He could have just said that, right? I mean, he's kind of repeating himself, right? He says it two different ways, once with present participles and once with nouns, right? I mean, but he could have just said that. Sin is lawlessness, people. Let's be perfectly clear about that, right? But instead, he brings in twice the poion verb, doing, action. Everybody doing sin. He doesn't want to just use nouns. He wants the verbs. He wants the present participles, right? Each of the doing sin ones also does lawlessness. And then just to make it 100% clear that you're tracking with me, I'll do it in nouns too. Sin, hamartia estin, he anomia. The sin is lawlessness. And that he was revealed so that he might take away sins. Notice again how the peril hamartias is the object, right? Has been the object of both times. Everyone hoion ten hamartian. You've got each of the doing sin people, and now you've got him are hamartias. He's taking away. He might take away sins. So that's the picture he gives us. The idea of the one who does sin and what it is they're doing, which is doing rebellion, anomia, lawlessness. And now what is God doing in his revelation when he was revealed? What did he do? Why was he revealed? What did he do to sin? I mean, once again, if the point were merely to say sin is lawlessness, God is not sin. There is no sin in God. Again, that as a syllogism, this works, and we can see where it's going, right? But again, he doesn't just do that. He brings in the verbs. He brings in the present participles, right? We're doing, those who are doing sin are doing rebellion. He's doing something to sin also. Sin is not in him. There isn't any sin in him. But it's more than that. There's an action that he performs with sin. Are. He's lifting it off. He's picking it up. He's taking it away. Right? That's how he is related to sin. Yeah. Yeah. So again, once again, he gives it to us twice, just as he did in the first sentence. Once again, he could just have said, there is, hamartia and auto uk estin. There is not, sin in him, not there is, right? There is no sin in him. So, as John's editor, we have suggestions for how he could really tighten this up a little bit, right? Yeah, just say, sin is lawlessness. There is no sin in him. Now, it really does sound like we're setting up syllogism, doesn't it? Right? But again, that isn't where he goes. He wants the verbs. Now, our verse 6. Pas ho enato menon. Each of the abiding in him ones. Sin not. Each of the abiding in him ones sin not. Clearly corresponding with each of the doing sin ones in verse 4. Right? Each of the abiding in him one. So by contrast, if you're doing sin one, you're doing rebellion. If you're an abiding in him one, you're not sinning. And each of the sinning ones, pas ho hamartonon, each of the sinning ones has not seen him, nor has he come to know him. Has not had that experience of him, right? And as we felt before, it's the second half of that verse that's the real kick in the teeth, right? If we just had the first half, no one who abides in him sins, we could kind of make it a little more okay for ourselves by saying, like at the moment, like, if you're sinning, if you're abiding in him, like you're in a good place, then you're not going to be sinning. And if you're sinning, you're not in a good place, right? But it's the second, like, okay, that's fine, right? But it's the second half of the verse. No one who sins has seen him or knows him. That it calls into question that entire knowing that you know him, the whole experience of him that was described earlier on, that sort of can't have happened, right? has not seen him, nor has he known him. And again, think about how from the first time we heard um, this verb, the coming to know verb, Devora, as you were recalling, how this is tied to actions and what we do. By this we know that we have come to know him, if we keep his commandments. By what we do is how we know that we know him. And if you are a doing sin one, as you're a sinning one, each of the sinning ones has not come to know him. In a sense, that again seems newly and strangely changing. On the other, or challenging rather. On the other hand, it's not that much different than what he said before. If you say you know him, if you say you've come to know him, and you don't keep his commandments, then you're lying. You're a liar. You're just saying a contradictory thing, right? This is very similar to that. Okay, so let's think more about abiding in him and seeing him in that, the seeing him and coming to know him stuff. So let's keep going then. Little children, technia, let no one planato, let no one lead you astray, right? Let nobody take you off the path. The doing righteousness one, once again, make sure no one deceives you. The one who practices righteousness. Interesting. The translation here doesn't do, I guess it's because it doesn't use pos. It doesn't use the, pos ho present participle construction that they don't use the everyone, no one structure to translate it, which makes sense. The one who practices righteousness is righteous, just as he is righteous. But again, John is using present participles, talking about that continuous action. The doing the righteousness one is righteous. Kathos, just as that one, him, God, is righteous. Again, how do you know that you've come to know him? What does righteousness look like? Righteousness looks like doing, poion, again. Same verb that's used twice in that first sentence. The one doing righteousness is righteous, just as he is righteous. Don't let anybody lead you astray. So I was talking the last couple of weeks about what I was semi-metaphorically talking or describing as the sort of the steady state theory of this paragraph, right? That it sounds almost like John is saying that, once you're saved, you're just like in. Like basically either you're saved or you're not. If you're saved, you won't sin. That's how you know you're saved, is that you don't even have the power to sin anymore. And if you find in the unlikely event, in the unlikely and deeply for you unfortunate event that you find yourself still capable of sinning, which I think most of us probably do, then it just means you're not saved. So, Merry Christmas. Right? I mean, like that's again, that's the disturbing that I think is the maximally disturbing reading of this paragraph. And there are moments in this paragraph where it feels hard to avoid, right? Where it feels hard to avoid this idea that John is saying, this is how it is for real Christians, okay? Right? If you've come to know God, this is what happens. And if this is not you, dude, I got bad news for you then, right? That's again, that's what I was calling the steady state thing. But the first thing we notice when we go back through verse by verse and are looking at his wording and the patterns of his structures, he's very much not talking about that kind of just about being. He's talking about doing, right? Even here, the doing righteousness one is righteous. Um, you know, yeah, who is it who's righteous? The one who does righteousness is righteous, just as he is righteous. Now, as usual, this doesn't make it easy, right? It doesn't make it not challenging. It does make it challenging. What does this mean? This means that what we do matters. And John cares very much what we do. He's not saying, real Christians won't sin. And if you sin, you're not a real Christian, so give up, right? He's definitely not saying that. But he is saying what you do matters. In fact, even what you do defines who you are. Each of the doing sin ones also does rebellion. No, each of the abiding in him ones does not sin. What you do you sin or do you not sin? It matters. It matters. Don't let anybody deceive you. Who's righteous? Not just somebody who's been, accepted into the fold, right? It's not about the label. It's not about the label. You call yourself a Christian, right? You say you have come to know God. And that doesn't matter if you don't that doesn't make you righteous. What makes you righteous? Doing righteousness makes you righteous, just as he is righteous, right? Just like abiding in him, right? Is the thing. And of course, once again, um, uh, this is not different from what he's been saying all the way through, right? If you say you're walking with God, but you're walking in darkness, you're lying and you're not doing poie, you're not doing the truth, or the truth is not in you. Remember, that was a dominant pattern in the first 4 or 5 paragraphs, right? If you say this, but the actions, the reality doesn't reflect that, then it's a lie. Maybe you're leading yourself astray. Maybe you're trying to lead other people astray, but you're saying the thing that is not, that cannot be. You're not speaking about reality. You're not abiding in him. And again, but now one of the reasons, by the way, that I made the comment that I just recently did about being in the fold, right? Having the label of Christian. Remember how this just came up very prominently 2 paragraphs ago in the big paragraph 7, the Antichrist paragraph, right? Because remember, there were a bunch of people that were in their church, people who called, and I think still, based on what he said about them, I believe still call themselves Christians. But they're not doing righteousness, right? They went out so that it might be revealed who they are, who they really are. And they were the ones who were planato, who were leading. It was in regards to them that he first said, don't let anybody lead you astray. So when he repeats that here, make sure nobody leads you astray. Make sure nobody leads you off the path. The one who does righteousness is righteous. It's not about labels, right? It's not about claims. It's about action. Devote, as you were saying, how do you know? How do you know that you know? Well, we remember his answer. If you keep his commandments, right? On what you do. The one who does righteousness is righteous, just as he is righteous. If you do righteousness, you will be righteous just as he is. You will walk in the light as he is in the light, right? You will be abiding in him. In him, there is no sin. And if you abide in him, you won't sin, right? Because he is the anti, his actions are the anti-sin actions. He was revealed in order to take away sins. Okay. And of course, the technia, we remember the technia from back in paragraph 8, right? Technia sets up the children of God thing. Yes, it means John is referring affectionately to his readers, but he's already transformed that in the last paragraph, right? Where uh, we are the technia, the techna of God, the children of God, little children, little children of God. Don't let anyone lead you astray. Um, and now hang on a second. That technia, that children of God thing, that seemed to be about who we are instead of what we do, didn't it? Because it talked about our being born of God, which seems like a kind of an identity thing, doesn't it? Well, we'll come back to that. Okay. In fact, he's going to move right on from it. So hopoion, once again, he does the present participle thing without the pos, without the each. So the parallel here, the one doing righteousness is righteous, the one who does sin is of the devil. So these two, he has, so verses 6 and, well, what are in 7 and 8 here is a parallel construction. The doing righteousness one is righteous just as he is righteous. The doing sin one is of the devil because the devil has been sinning from the beginning, has sinned. This is, what is this? Present. Oh, yeah. Weirdo. So this is just a present tense verb, which is being used. The devil sins from the beginning. So it's a present tense verb, but in context, that is in the applying the, because aparkes is like an adverbial phrase applied to hamartenai there, has been sinning to the present tense verb, right? So for contextualizing that verb with the adverb phrase from the beginning, right? That certainly suggests ongoing action, right? Has been sinning. That's really interesting. Has been sinning, of course, the English phrase with which the interlinear is translating that, has been sinning, is a perfect phrase, right? So there's a present tense verb, and it's not translating as a present tense verb, it's translating as a present perfect verb, has been sinning, present perfect progressive, technically, in English, right? Because it would sound in English super weird to say the devil sins from the beginning. Yeah, so I get the only thing that I dislike about using has been sinning as a translation of this tense is that the use of the perfect, the has in English, suggests that the action is completed in the present tense. Like if you say uh, um, if you say something like you know, I have been watching, that show from the beginning. Um, you're not necessarily implying that you're done watching it now, but it is one possible application of that, right? Um, actually, that's a pretty good syntactic parallel, isn't it? Right? If someone is like, "Oh yeah, Doctor Who, I've been watching Doctor Who, since the '60s." Ap our case, But our case was quite a long time ago in Doctor Who world. Um, that seems to be, as far as I can understand, um, yeah, Devora is exactly right. It implies that he's never stopped sinning. He did it then and he's still at it. Yes, 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 exactly. Talk about your repeat offenders, right? Talk about your ongoing. See, this is where we can see something like ongoing, continuous action, right? It seems to me in this kind of phrase. Um, yeah. Okay. So the doing sin one is of the accuser because the accuser has been sinning. The accuser sins from the beginning. Right. Again, try to keep the parallel in mind. The doing righteousness one is righteous, just as he is righteous. The doing sin one is of the accuser because the accuser sins from the beginning. The thing that makes this tricky is that it is not a perfect parallel. The main phrase is a perfect parallel. The doing righteousness one, the doing sin one. Right? Those are the two things that are being put in parallel. And both of them are being connected to something else. The doing righteousness one is being connected to the righteousness of God. The doing sin one is being connected to the sin of the accuser. Right? So far, so good, as far as the parallel structure is concerned. Where the parallelism deviates, right? Where John is not keeping them parallel, is uh, kathos and hoti, the conjunctions, right? Uh, the one doing righteousness is righteous just as he is. So we're comparing the righteousness of the doing righteousness one to God's righteousness, right? So it's what we get kathos, we get the just as there, right? In the second one, we don't get just as. The one doing sin, is unrighteous as the devil is unrighteous, right? That's not what he says, because it's not a just as. He's not comparing the sinningness, the sin, whatever the sin. You're not comparing the sin. Let's just stick with the verb, stick with the noun rather. He's not comparing the sin of the sinner, of the doing sin one, to the sin of the devil. There's no just as. It's hoti. It's because instead. What is the righteousness of the doing righteousness person like? It's just like God's righteousness. But that's not the question that he's asking in this. He doesn't ask, what is the sin of the sinful person like? That's not the question he's answering in the second one. The second part of the sentence answers the question, why does the sinner sin? You see? The doing sin one is of the devil. Ek. No, wait, hang on. That's not of, that's out of. Yeah. Can't fool me. Man, see, this interlinear tries to slide translations of prepositions past. Always look at the prepositions in Greek. I got to tell you. Okay. Ek. Out of, from the devil. The one practicing sin is from the accuser. Right? Am I understanding ek properly there? I think I am. It's from, has come out of. Yes, from out, from among. Just like the people went out from us. Right? Before? Yes. Exactly, Adenese. Their source is the accuser. Yeah, yeah. Okay, exactly. So again, do you see the difference I'm pointing to here? The different questions that he's answering with these two. It's a big difference between kathos and hoti, between just as and because of, right? Um, so so Devora, one way to understand it would be like that. Devora says, I keep thinking he's drawing a family resemblance. You sin just like your father, the devil sins. Is it possible that out of is that kind of family relationship? Uh, yeah. So Devora, when you set up a really elaborate parallel and then deviate from it a little bit like this, you kind of get a twofer, if you see what I mean, right? Like, because your brain's already thinking that way. The parallel structure gets your brain on that track. So if you say the one who does righteousness is righteous, the righteousness of the doing righteousness person is just like the righteousness of God. The sin of the doing sin person is of the accuser. Your brain like fills the gap, right? I mean, it's hard not to complete the parallel in your head. You're left with the impression that there is that likeness, right? That there is a sense in which just as the righteousness of the doing righteousness person is like the righteousness of God, so too the sin of the sinning person is like the sin of the accuser. Like that seems almost like you would have to like work really hard to keep your brain from pursuing. I mean, that's one of the it's how parallels work. It's why people use parallel structure. Um, it's why in your writing and speaking, proper parallel structure is really important and can be really effective, right? Because when you establish that what you're doing is you're laying down a set of tracks for the brains of your hearers and readers to follow you, right? Um, and human brains are really good at noticing patterns of this kind and following along with patterns like that. It's a thing that we do, right? So, so Devore, I do think that he does accomplish that here. Um, I mean, the two halves of this sentence almost inescapably say, accomplish saying people who do righteousness are over here. They're like God. They're taking after God, to use the family resemblance language, Devore, that you're using. Whereas the people doing sin over here are like the devil, are like the accuser. They're taking after the accuser. Right. Again, I think that's true? Yes. Do I think that he's kind of implying that? Yes. But he does this risky thing. Instead of just letting that parallelism play out in full, instead of using another kathos phrase, right? The one doing sin uh, is, in rebellion. He could have gone there, right? Is in rebellion, just as the accuser is in rebellion. Bring verse 4 back into it, wrap it up, right? Oh man, yeah, that would have been perfect. But he doesn't do that. John reaches for another step as well. And again, I think it's added to. I don't think it's in replacement of. I think it's kind of added to that. The rest of that does seem to me to fit, and he set it up. But the extra step is the because. It's the why. And essentially, Devora, it's doing that same thing, right? Talking about the family resemblance, but it goes a step further in that, right? Why? Why do you have a kind of family resemblance to the accuser if you're sinning? Because you don't take after strangers, right? um, yeah, yeah. Because the one doing sin is out of the devil, is from the devil. And yeah, the one doing sin is of the devil. not of. I want to get away from this. That's not what it says. From, out of, from the devil. The devil sent them, right? And this is important because remember where we started the sentence. Little children, let no one lead you astray. Who's trying to lead them astray? The ones who are not from them, but from the accuser. The not the ones that are not, that have not been anointed with the anointing from the Holy One, but the ones who have the antichristoi, right? The antichrisma, the anti-anointing, the ones who are from the accuser. Those people whom you considered your brothers and sisters, but who are now saying these other things, who are now denying that Jesus is the Christ, who are denying that Jesus is the Son of God, the father and son denying ones that he talked about in paragraph 7, they are ek, the accuser. They're from the accuser, like emissaries of the accuser, right? Delegates, practically, of the accuser. That's what doing sin ones are. If you do sin, you don't just like look like the accuser, right? It's not just that by doing sin, you take on an uncanny resemblance to the accuser. That's true, but it's more than that. When you're doing sin, you're from, out of the accuser. You've become his emissaries, his servants, his children. That's what it means to so notice by going here, he's kind of upped the stakes. It's not just like objective, like it's not just a question of sin is rebellion and there's no sin in God. So if you're in God, you won't sin. That's all very neutral in a sense, if you see what I mean. Like it's all very like generic. There's something at stake here, like the leading astray of other people, the doing righteousness. And I think that righteousness has to do with relationship also, especially what is the Hebrew word for righteousness? Tzedakah, isn't that it? Which seems to be an intrinsically relationship related word. Like to be righteous means to be like in right relationship. Something of that Hebrew concept seems to be, to me, very likely to be imported here into how the Greek word dikaiosune, dikaios, righteous, and righteousness is being used here. Anyway, in other words, it's not just about you and God, right? Are you going to be like God or not? Are you going to be close to God or far away from God? Are you going to be in rebellion against God or not? Like to be in rebellion against God kind of sounds, I don't know what, impersonal, right? If you see what I mean, right? But uh but uh but there are other people involved here, right? There's other work involved. God had a job, right? He was revealed for a purpose, to take away sin. If you're doing sin, you're not just harming yourself, right? Yeah, Randall, that's a really good Oh, wonderful, Randall. Thank you for that. Randall is sort of clarifying. I love preposition clarifications. This helps me so much. He's talking about the difference between the Greek ek and the Greek apo. Apo would mean from, like an emissary. Like if somebody sent an emissary to someone else, um, apo would be so from in that sense would be apo, whereas ek is more like out of, like a child. Um, is it's a child is from their parent is ek to diabolo in a way that is more like a child is from their parents than a messenger is from the person who sent them. And oh, that's wonderful. Yeah, Randall points to the word apostolos, the word apostle, which has the apo at the beginning, right? That's what the beginning of the word apostle means. It's means sent, the sent ones, right? The ones who are being sent out. Um, yes, okay. Are out of the devil. Um, uh, I think of the way that they use that phrase in like dog and horse breeding, which always seemed to me rather crudely literal. When you say that like a particular horse is by the sire and out of the dam, right? Um, out of in that sense is what you're saying in that kind of a genealogical sense. Um, yeah, yeah, and of course that makes perfect sense. Not only because I think it still connects with the um, so like the one doing sin is um a child of the sin, right? Praise says I'm envisioning chest bursters from the movie Alien. Um, Somewhat like that. Yeah, yeah. Um, and obviously, again, this is the sentence that starts with technia, children, right? Children, parentheses of God, right? Let no one lead you astray. Um, the doing sin one is and so in a sense, when he does the new thing, right? When he does the parallel, and then he kind of takes the second half of the parallel in this new direction, it's not a totally new direction because he's already laid the groundwork for it in technia at the very beginning, right? Child of God, don't let anybody lead you astray. The doing sin one is a child of the accuser, right? Um, because hoti abarkes ho diabolos hamartenai. Um, yes, hoti because. Um, okay, hang on. I want to come back to the hoti. I still think the causal reasoning, in a sense, of this whole second half of the parallel is a really important reason how it's different. But I want to come back to the hoti because I'm not sure I'm understanding it in the immediate context now, forgetting the rest of the parallel. What does it mean to say the doing sin one is out of the devil, is out of the accuser, is a child of the accuser, because is he saying that the being out of the devil, like what is the cause and what is the effect? If you see what I mean, is what I'm trying to puzzle out here. Um, because the devil sins from the beginning, that's why sinning ones are out of the devil. Um, yeah, I'm having a hard time with cause and effect here. Has uh, the length of time for which the accuser has been sinning, doesn't itself seem to have a causal relationship with sinning ones being of the devil. I mean, it's the idea like basically, um, if you're sinning, you're totally a child of the devil because he like totally patented this whole sin move, right? And so you're basically, you know, you're like um uh pulling the devil's stunt here, right? Um, but even there, the because doesn't exactly um saying the devil has been sinning from the beginning is um yeah, thank you, Randall. I was actually going to ask that, but then I forgot. Randall's point in John 8:44, when Jesus is talking, and when Jesus says, "You are of your father, the devil," right? Um, what preposition does he use there? And Randall was just confirming he does use ek. You are ek, your father, the diabolo there. So it is a very similar construction. Um, okay. Susan is suggesting that perhaps we think about hoti less as cause and effect, less rigidly as because, and perhaps something more like since or as, possibly. The doing sin one is out of the devil, is by the devil, right? Is a child of the devil, a child of the accuser, since the devil sins from the beginning. Um, hmm. On the one hand, of course, the aparches isn't just a period of time. I mean, it is a period of time, right? Um, he sins aparches. But of course, aparches is one of our noteworthy phrases, right, that we've been tracking throughout this epistle. Um, again, back to the first sentence. Um, it is God who is aparches. But he doesn't just use the phrase in like the Genesis 1 sense. Um, he's also talking like back to the beginning of our experience, back to the beginning of of the message and of the word. Um, here it's the beginning of sinning. Again, it's like saying the accuser invented sin. The accuser started the rebellion. Hamartia being anomia, after all, as we established. Since hamartia is anomia, is rebellion, lawlessness. The diabolos, the accuser, is the one who started the rebellion in the beginning. And so if you're sinning, you're joining the rebellion. You are becoming a child of the accuser. Right. Susan says it's a status. You're aligning yourself with the one who is firmly associated with sin. Yes. Yes. And again, this is like the association he was making at the beginning. Um, he appeared. That one appeared so that he might take away sins, and there is no sin in him. If you're abiding in him, you don't sin. Right? He, God is associated with not sinning, indeed, with the removal of sin. The accuser is associated with sinning. Yeah. Um, okay, good. Because we're going to get right back to that, the purpose for which the Son of God was revealed. And that seems to fit really well. Okay. Um, Unfortunately, I have to leave a little bit early today. I just got a message which says I should leave early. So um, I'm gonna start. We're not gonna finish the whole thing. We've got about halfway through. We'll do the second half next time. Thanks so much for joining me. As always, this was really, really great. I feel like I'm getting how this all fits together so much better. We'll finish up. Hope to finish this up next time, finish up paragraph 9, and then we can move on towards paragraph 10. All right. Thanks everybody for joining me, and I will see you guys next week.